Welcome to this 5th episode of Never Rarely, Sometimes Always, the show that reveals the lives, loves and disappointments of groundbreaking researchers and academics. We'll spare none of the details and delve deep into what makes thinkers within our school tick. This is a raw and unedited insight into the fascinating inner thoughts and rarely shared experiences of some of the most fascinating people in our community, scholars. This series is brought to you by QUT's School of Public Health and Social Work. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Not all academics step straight from an undergraduate degree into a PhD and then onto the academic stage as lecturers. Many have had other extensive life experiences that they harness to eventually get their academic qualifications and expand on their career as knowledge creators. And the 3 researchers on the show today are going to speak a little bit about their experiences with this. Let's introduce them. First up, we have lecturer in health management, Lana Elliott. Lana has worked in various capacities in health management, public health and development in both Australia and abroad, informing her research interest in the impact of policy on community health outcomes. Since joining QUT, she has focused on the design and delivery of health systems, health planning, evaluation and global health policy courses that reflect and are informed by her research and experience. Next, Dr. Olivia Fisher. Olivia has extensive experience in the mental health sector over the past 20 years in clinical, health promotion, community, employment, teaching and research roles. Her mental health research focuses on protective factors which may play a role in prevention of depression and anxiety disorders and promotion of mental well-being. Her other research interests include implementation science and health systems. And finally, Louise Baldwin. Louise is a globally recognised leader in health promotion and public health. She has over 2 decades of practice and research experience at the local, state, national and global levels. In 2016, no longer content with seeing preventative health initiatives come and go, she boldly moved to QUT to make a difference and establish a series of evidence-based research programs to improve the health of communities, plus undertake a PhD in sustainability of health promotion programs. And despite all of this, and maybe we'll talk about this later, Louise is still what we call an early career researcher. I know she's keen to have a chat about that. These academics and researchers represent a perfect mix between real-world experience and academic resilience, and I'm looking forward to finding out more. Let's start by asking the question we ask all our guests. Tell me about your hot beverage and the cup it's in. Let's start with you, Olivia.
Okay, well, I've actually got my dog on a leash because he's about to have a tantrum in the background. So if you're seeing me doing the, that's, working from home life. My cup is in my other hand so that he won't pull it out. So it looks like just a normal cup on the outside, but I'm not going to show you because it would involve spilling in my coffee, and I do not spill my coffee. It says "Be here now." So my mum and I have the same cup, and it's just this little teeny tiny writing on the inside so that when you're drinking it, it says, just be here now, enjoy the coffee, enjoy the sip, chill out. You can go off into the clouds again later. Just, live the coffee moment, basically. So this is live in the coffee moment.
Oh, I love that so much. In fact, another academic, I made an error the other day, and an academic colleague wrote to me and said, just be in the moment, just go have a cup of tea. So that's like a perfect combination of both of that advice. What about you, Louise?
I have a cup. I'm not quite sure whether you can see the writing. It says, she believed she could, so she did. And also we have a theme about mothers because my mother gave me this cup, and she's from the era that women couldn't always achieve what they wanted to achieve, particularly career-wise. And I think I had a few hurdles in my early years, losing my dad when I was young, etc. And I think she's watched me find a career as a first in family university person as well, and kind of go off into ether and do what I thought I wanted to do and try and make a difference. So she gave me this cup and she says to me, well, you believe you can do it, so you can. So I try and also go by that mantra and instill that in my children then as well.
Wow, good on you, mums. You got clever ones. And what about you, Lana? A cup from your mum?
Mine's a little bit more disappointing. So this is a cup that I stole from the tea room in my first week at QT, and I've just held on to it ever since. But I picked the orange one actually because it reminds me of a mug that I left at my mum's house that I found in Hungary and thought it was amazing. It was this really interesting shaped cup, and carried it through all of Europe for about 6 months and didn't break it, and brought it all the way home thinking mum would love it. And I unpacked it and she went, "That's hideous." And so I've got this mug that I leave at her house just to remind her that I carried it through all of Europe and she didn't want it. And this was the closest I could find in Queensland.
And what are you drinking from it?
I've got a herbal tea. So at about 10 o'clock every day, anyone that's on campus will see me run upstairs and fill up a cup of tea and come all the way back down. And it's my little kind of 5-minute break between the morning and the mid-morning.
Little punctuation mark. What about you, Olivia? We didn't ask you what's in your tea. What's in your cup? Is it tea?
It's coffee made with a V60, and I can give you all sorts of very detailed information about what I'm drinking, but I don't know that you want that level of detail.
V60.
Oh, it's an amazing like Japanese funnel with a filter, and it makes just the best long black, and then you add a dash of milk. Spectacular.
Nice. Wow. Okay, a coffee expert in our midst.
No, just pedantic.
And Louise, what are you drinking from your mum cup?
My mum cup. I've got a black coffee, and I started drinking black coffee a few years ago when I was working somewhere where the shared kitchen had a bit of tension around it about who took which milk, and I'd always forget to buy my own milk. So I thought, well, I'll just start drinking black coffee and then I don't need to worry about my milk in the fridge. So black coffee for me.
Good move. The ultimate conflict avoidance.
Yeah.
Don't play. Okay, so all of you, coincidentally, and we were talking in the pre-show chat that I did not plan this when I invited you on together, but you've all had really extensive careers in industry and with government and with NGOs before you came into the sort of academic scene, or as well as kind of having a foot in the door of the academic scene, but not 2 feet. So I'd really like to hear a little bit about your journeys and what you did before and why it was that you decided to put your 2 feet into the academic space and become researchers and scholars. So can we start with you, Lana, on that one?
Sure. I think every time that I have finished a degree, I've thought that was the last one and I'll never be back. And then every couple of years I've returned to university to study more. So I guess in that respect, it's a bit inevitable that I've ended up here long term. But I initially started, I guess, my major career was in the Pacific. So I worked in initially through a volunteer capacity and then stayed for a number of years for the Ministry of Health in Vanuatu doing strategic development for their non-communicable disease policies. And ended up there through a bit of an accident of a relationship that ended and trying to escape because, hey, it's easier to move countries than admit a relationship's over. And so spent a number of years there and then moved to Brisbane with no real plans of what to do next. So spent a number of months applying for positions and things and was put in contact with someone at QUT who at that time needed some work done on a particular project. And I think what all of my careers have shown to date is that turning up, being present and doing a good job really can get you a foot indoors that you don't think will open. And so it was through a few months of rewriting a unit that I sat in an office every day and people saw that I was there, and that led to the opportunities. And I've now been at QUT for a bit over 3 years.
So what was it about the compulsion of the PhD? You said it was inevitable that you found your way back to the kind of academic space, but was there something in particular that, or is there something in particular that keeps drawing you back?
I love learning. It doesn't matter what the topic is. I love learning whatever there is to learn. And so I think a PhD is an opportunity to find that problem that sits in the back of your mind for a number of years and just get to look at that and understand that more. And that's, I think it's such a privilege to get that opportunity to sit down and say, what am I interested in and how can I contribute to improving that? In a small way or a big way, whatever type of research project you're doing, it's just a fascinating opportunity to really get to take a deep dive into learning something new and something you're passionate in.
It is, isn't it? What about you, Liv? Is that what you found?
Coming into doing a PhD, you mean? Look, I swore blind I was never going to be a researcher. Like, just no way. And I came into doing the PhD because I'd sort of hit a point where there was I was working in not-for-profits, and there was a lot of government funding cuts all at once, state, local and federal government cuts all at the same time in health promotion. And so I was doing a role which was changing substantially, and I decided not to renew my contract. And I sort of went, okay, well, did a bit of mapping of, what was around in Australia and what would I want to go to next. And there was just nothing that I really, at that moment in time, wanted to do. And so I sort of went, oh, well, I'll suck it up and do that research that my first principal supervisor, Janet Toe, had been harassing me for years to do a PhD, and I kept laughing at her. And yeah, even like 2-3 years into it, it took 3 years to get our data. Like, we had failed pilot after failed pilot. Everything went wrong. Like, this was just, textbook what not to do in a PhD, I think. And we finally got the data at like the 2-year and 11-month mark. We got the data, and I started looking at the data and went, this is fascinating. I want to be a researcher. And it was like this overnight thing of going, hey, we've actually managed to get data that no one else has been able to get before. And that was why it was so hard. But, we're starting to be able to answer questions that I really wanted to be able to answer. So that was I now see myself as a researcher, but it's sort of a very sudden transformation after this, very adamant, no, never, will not.
You had quite a colourful pre-research life, didn't you?
Yeah. Yes, depending on on your definition of colourful, yeah.
What were some of the kind of professional experiences that you had that you think have really really benefited you in terms of now working in the academy?
So I started out as an occupational therapist, clinical OT, and gained a lot of knowledge and understanding about how systems operate. I worked in lots of different areas, so public, private, acute, community, employment, in different sort of roles as an OT. And what I found over time was I got more and more frustrated about how much we missed, how many people were ending up coming into a psych hospital that didn't need to, if we'd put something in place 6 months before, if we'd, it was just, it got to the point where I couldn't continue doing that work. And so I went into doing health promotion work, and ended up, after a long and involved series of events, being the Mind Matters Queensland coordinator, and in that role being able to travel all over Queensland working with schools, and using their own data and using their really solid, look, you shut up, really solid processes to support them to actually implement a whole school framework for mental health and wellbeing for the students, for the staff, and for parents and community around. And but I've also done stuff like stage management and been a dance teacher, and done many other sort of random things. So I kind of feel like my life has been a series of random events and finding things that I was accidentally good at that have sort of led me to the point that I'm at today. But yeah, so my really big main focus is, prevention and improving systems to actually get better at what we do so that we don't continue making the mistakes of the past.
That's a similar story to yours, isn't it, Louise? You, as I said in the bio, in 2016, you decided enough is enough. I need to do something that will lead to kind of long-term change. So can you tell us a bit about the events leading up to that, and that moment where you decided this is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a very similar story to Liv's, actually. Working in prevention, I actually started off doing a teaching degree right here at QUT. I've done a complete full circle, which means I've been involved in our campus for a really long time. But and I had maintained involvement along the way with QUT, doing little bits of sessional work, doing some guest lecturing, being on an industry advisory committee myself, advising back to the school and the curriculum. So I'd maintained a very strong involvement along with doing my masters, etc. But I had this, wonderful trajectory of career through local government, not-for-profit, state government, in the health promotion sector, and working very much in cancer control. That has always been like a large part of my background in terms of cancer prevention, with a really big focus on skin cancer prevention. And that was always a very dedicated move for me. I lost my father from a melanoma when I was very young. And when I was old enough to understand that that's one of the cancers that can be prevented, I thought, same thing, enough is enough. We've got to do something about this. And I volunteered with Cancer Council initially, which is always why I'm a big advocate for volunteering for our students if they are able to, and worked there for a number of years. And actually, similar to Live with the Mind Matters, I managed the Sun Smart Schools program, which again is a holistic, health promoting schools kind of approach. And then moved through and ended up privately consulting for a number of years, in fact, whilst my children were young. And that also then gave me this wonderful opportunity to kind of dive in and out of not only different state government organisations, but a number of the not-for-profits. And I started to see the same kind of things happening. And even though they were looking at different particular health issues, and often on the chronic disease prevention side, there was similar system issues, there was similar program issues, similar funding issues, and it made me start to think there's got to be a better way. And so as I progressed into management roles, etc., I see that it was just really, really difficult to really do evidence-based practice well when you're in practice, and really keep in touch with what's happening with research. And plus, to be honest, there was big things about research that I didn't know. I'm much more of a qualitative person. So there was a number of things about quantitative research. When I'd read the papers, I'd think, I don't really get that, And so I wanted to know more. And a little bit like Lana said, I love learning. And if there's something I don't know, I want to understand it. And so I guess I had this, great passion for doing great things. And I kept seeing research coming out saying huge things like, we really can prevent 1/3 of cancers. But then I was sitting in the cancer control space thinking it's so hard to put all this into practice. And also then I kept seeing programs get funded and stop, and funded and stop. And, and that has an issue from a health side, but also from the community side, who are involved in those programs, because they get, very invested, and there's a wonderful amount of community engagement. And then that also stops, which is equally concerning. So yes, I decided to come across and do my PhD in looking at how we sustain our health promotion programs longer term, and then have been able to build a number of research programs here to start looking at that really broad healthy communities approach, and looking at settings a little bit more broadly as well, which was another gap.
So if there's one kind of lesson, I guess, or one experience that you had, looking back at kind of memories of making that progression and now working as you are, what would that one thing be that you think you've taken from that experience and now you apply to research?
I think an opportunity to make things better. If you see a gap in the system, or even in the way that communities can participate or can engage, that there are ways to be involved and to help to overcome that. That it's not just a problem that needs to stay there, and it takes grit, and it takes determination, and it takes being pretty risky and a whole lot of creativity along the way. But that there are ways to overcome it and try and make a difference. What about you, Lana? What would be the one thing that you've brought from those experiences?
I think a lot of my drive is about deficit models not being helpful, purely showing people what the problem is, or showing where they're not doing as well as they could, doesn't help people. I think really showcasing brilliant work that is being done as almost case studies of how other organisations or different units within a workplace can improve their work really gives people that motivation of, yeah, we've got this, we can actually improve our system. But purely highlighting problems is, I think it's a bit redundant, and we all know what the problems are. It's about highlighting opportunities for improving. And I think that's something we all need to keep in mind in our research of who is it benefiting and in what way do we need to frame it to support that improvement.
It's really interesting that you say that, Lana, because it's my understanding anyway, and correct me if I've got this wrong, but a whole PhD program is premised on the candidate being able to find a problem and to solve that problem, isn't it? So it's almost as though you've got that wonderful perspective that I can totally see could work to produce change, and yet we're still in this kind of old schema of, well, your job is to find where something's not working and fix it. Is there?
Yeah, I think it's more about, instead of laying blame with individual units or ministries of health or non-government organisations, it's about saying there's bigger problems with the system. And I think that comes from my main interest is in political economy and interest in politics and policy, of saying that a lot of our policies don't work because of bigger structural factors, because we don't structure our society in a way that benefits people that need it the most. So finding those things as the problem rather than individuals in organisations to be a problem.
Yes, very, very good and very true. We could talk for hours about this, I'm sure. and in fact, I'm finding that most of my social media discussions are around trying to get this idea across to kind of mainstream audiences that, we have got to stop looking at individuals as the source of problems, and in fact, look at what might be driving those individuals on a structural level.
I think it's just so much easier to point blame at individuals, and I think it's intellectually lazy. And so in academia, that's not what we're about. And so we do need to push the boundaries and say, let's take a step back. Where is this really coming from?
I just want to capture that and put it on a big poster.
From an individual perspective though, we feel better as individuals if we feel like we've got something that we can do that's going to make a positive difference. It's even down to things like, you want to lose weight, let's focus on a healthy meal that you're going to eat, as opposed to I can't have chocolate. The deficit of I can't have versus, hey, I can do this thing, and that's an action and that's a positive, and I can, that's going to make a positive contribution. I think it goes across all levels, individual, community, organisational. Yeah. I'm preaching to the converted here.
Oh, don't forget, we have pretty big audiences. So there is a whole bunch of people. And I did want to get back to a point that you raised, Louise, because what we're trying to do in this show is to actually make the language that we use accessible. And you talked about something really interesting back then. And it was around the difference between quantitative and qualitative research. And you said, I didn't know the difference between these two things, and I'd heard about them. So can you just give us a brief rundown of what you're talking about when you talk about those two ideas and why they're so important to what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an system thing in itself, isn't it? Because in the university world, we talk about quantitative and qualitative, numbers and words and different ways of collecting data. But in fact, when we translate that into practice, we're really looking at what's working, what's not working, and what needs to change to continue to make a positive difference in the future. So yes, and I think that is part of the big divide between research and practice as well, is this difference. And the quantitative research, which is incredibly valuable from a validity and reliability point of view, is very, very important. But then in terms of the way that it's reported, sometimes that's very difficult to translate into practice. And so it might, for example, be looking very in-depth detail about something that's happened in a pilot, and that can be around behaviour change. It can even relate to the broader things that we all seem to be passionate about in terms of policy change and those strengths-based approaches around the wide community approaches. So we need those numbers, and we need that very strict kind of mathematics, quantitative measures behind that to get the validity. but I guess certainly in the world that I work in terms of building healthy communities, we also need the stories, and we need the words, and we need the richness that can come from those qualitative stories, be they case studies, you know, be they storytelling. And that sounds not very academic, but in fact, stories from regional and rural communities about, you know, what the health needs are, but also what their community strengths are and how we can work together going forward are some of the most valuable things. So yes, I certainly have learned a lot more about the quantitative side and to understand those metrics and the reporting, but have been delighted that there is a greater movement as well in understanding and celebrating and really valuing the qualitative side of research and just how important it is to then make a difference with communities and also then translate that into practice.
Sounds like, just as Lana mentioned earlier, the idea of the old-fashioned idea within academia, maybe another old-fashioned idea is that stories aren't very academic.
Right. Yeah, right.
Okay, we're going to jump on to this topic that I know that you're all pretty keen to talk about, and this is the idea of the early career researcher. And I'd like to contextualize this a little bit for our audience, just in case people don't know what I'm talking about when I say that. But an early career researcher is, as the name suggests, a category of researcher who are kind of in the early stages of their career. And then we've got midterm research, mid-career researchers and seasoned researchers.
Nice way to put it.
And you guys, you're all what we would kind of term as early career researchers, but we were talking earlier about how that term perhaps is a little bit problematic. And maybe Liv, can you start us off on that conversation?
Oh yeah, I got opinions on this. Look, my you know, I'm in my 40s. I'm not an early career anything as far as I'm concerned, and it's quite, for me personally, getting to the end of my PhD, and you know, you kind of go, all right, if I went out into the, you know, the non-academic world, there's nobody would consider me an early anything. You know, I'm Dr. Fisher. I've got, you know, 20 years experience. I've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of whatever else. But in this very kind of almost artificial sort of way, we're kind of seen as starting again, and it drives me up the wall. But I think, yeah, look, I have many things that I could say about this, and a lot of them you'd cut out because of language.
It's an unedited show, so we don't
the R-rated version of the show. Look, I think it's been really confronting, I think, as an individual, being told, no, you're starting again. And I think that it very much depends on the person and, you know, who it is that I've been working with. But this idea that you've got to prove yourself all over again, you know, oh, you've only done this sort of research, you did your PhD on this, you know, whatever, that's what your box is now. And so I'm slowly, quietly trying to to build my box back out again to, you know, yes, yeah, anyway. I'll stop my mental swearing and let somebody else talk.
What about, how's it been for you, Lana, to be labelled as an ECR, early career researcher?
Yeah, see, I'm not sure that anyone feels like they fit in that box. As someone that hasn't finished my PhD, you know, sometimes early career is that defined as 5 or 10 years post PhD, and not having got to that, I'm like, oh, I'm not even in that box yet. So, you know, and that is, yeah, quite demoralizing sometimes when I consider, you know, I've provided advice to national governments, I've written policy briefs, I've done jobs that, yeah, have a lot of weight and should be considered important in, you know, building those links that create impact in our research. And to, you know, not even feel like I fit in the ECR box is sometimes a bit like, oh, okay, you know, how much do I need to prove myself?
Yeah, it's quite a patriarchal and quite, you know, very hierarchical system, isn't it? That doesn't necessarily reflect people's experiences and talents.
Yeah, I think we just all need to stop seeing it as some kind of signifier of our worth. You know, what we've done is important. And yeah, I think that box is a bit redundant.
All these redundant things. Look, we can phrase for the better. Just one
we'll change the world in one show. It's fine.
What about you, Louise?
Yeah, I think I like the word patriarchal, and I was thinking patriarchal and patronizing as well, that it can be when you come across. And, you know, like I said, for me, I was sort of at the point in my career where, for me, a PhD and you know, moving into an academic career was a wonderful growth and next step. And I only saw it as that before I arrived in the role and thought, hold on a minute, I'm not going back and starting again. And you know, I really do think I'm a better researcher, or I do like to call myself a pracademic, because I do think I'm still a practicing academic, because, you know, a lot of my research is about running programs, you know, with the community. And it's just the fact that we wrap it in great evaluation. And the point is to work out what's working to make Queensland healthier, and how can we scale that across the state. So, you know, I one of my colleagues in business who is a similar career history that we all seem to have as well, she uses the term pracademic, so I proudly steal that from her. But yes, I think that it's crazy to think that you bring all of this experience, and particularly when we are the university for the real world, that the real world experience that we bring in actually, for me, makes me a better researcher. And I'm sure if I had have gone straight from undergrad and then when I did my master's, if I had have gone straight into a PhD, I don't think I could have done the richness and also to really investigate, and there's another word we can talk about, but really investigate or deep dive into an issue that is so relevant in practice. I think if I hadn't have been in practice for such a long time, I wouldn't have identified this theme that I wanted to look into more. So I think the system absolutely needs to change. Or does it need to change? I think it just needs to have many pathways that different people can take that suits them, because that is the real world. And I think that's incredibly important for that lifelong learning, no matter what type of career you have or how long you've been in certain areas in your career.
Yeah, the insistence on things like, you know, you've got to have 20 publications, you've got to have 30 publications before anyone's going to take you seriously. And you go, well, that's going to take 10 years maybe to get to that point. I'm going to be in my 50s then before anyone takes me seriously in academia. You know, is that, yeah, it's ridiculous, frankly.
It's crazy. And outside of the university system, you know, we lead global programs that are worth millions of dollars that you get into the university system, and oh no, you can't apply for that because you don't have that magic number. I mean, that's really crazy. And I think, you know, in fact, encouraging people with incredible career experiences to lead those programs is actually going to be far more impactful for the research outcomes. And, you know, potentially along the way, far more impactful for scaling up that research and, you know, getting more funding support and then greater outcomes along the way.
Yeah, I'm really interested, as early career researchers, what is it that you do, or what is it you find works really well in terms of getting your research out there into the community, and having your research known as much as your kind of prior work was renowned and known. Any tips there for early career?
Having all come from industry backgrounds, I think there's some validity to our research based on the fact that it's largely grounded in what industry wanted. And that's what, you know, whether people read my papers for the fun of reading my papers, you know, good luck if you've got free time on a Sunday afternoon. You know, the people that I really care about reading my work are the people that then inform decisions made in countries where my research is based. And so, yeah, from my perspective, it's more about sitting down with policymakers and understanding what their problems are and how my research can contribute, and then making it accessible. You know, I think, you know, if we want to talk about something else redundant, there's paywalls on journals of, if we need our papers to be read by people, particularly in my case, in developing countries, then those need to be accessible to people in developing countries. And so I think, yeah, for me, it's just about answering questions that need answering to people that are in the position that they can inform their decisions. So yeah, less so about, you know, kind of social media buzz around what I'm doing, but more about getting those policy briefs under the right people at the right time.
Yeah, it sounds like your work is so entwined with the people you're working with and for that there's no need to, you're not promoting it after the fact.
Well, yeah, like getting up at my confirmation, I really appreciate the time taken by the panel to review it, but their opinion to me was less important than when I went back to the communities that I work with and told them what I was doing. If they'd have said this is a horrible idea, then, you know, that would have been a horrible experience and would have changed what I was doing. But people in Australia, in terms of what my research is about, it's lovely if they think it's cool, but it's less relevant at that point.
Yeah, I agree, Lana, and I think that's so important too. You know, I kind of see that whatever the toolkit or the resource is, or the thing that I've developed with the community or with the other organisations or whoever I'm working with, is actually the really important output, because it's potentially then something that can be used and integrated into the way the community's working, or the organisations within the community who can all take a piece of the pie and work together towards improving health. And to me, the paper is the thing I do at the end to then make sure that there is that evidence growing about what's working or what's not working in terms of building a healthy Queensland. But to me, it's almost a little bit of a secondary piece. But the main thing that I'm looking for is to co-produce that piece, you know, with the people that I'm engaging with to then make the difference. And I also find its use of language that's really important. And my work tends to be very broad. You know, I'll work on the ground with communities around a number of issues. And these days I'm even looking more into social entrepreneurship and what role that has with health, which is fabulous. But then a large part of my work is around the built environment, and particularly how we create healthy built environments and encourage that not only health, but the community collaboration. So I find I've learned over the years this whole new language of urban planning and landscape architecture language that I have to use, and I enjoy using with my colleagues in that area, because that's what makes a difference to them. You know, we don't want to lump health into what they're doing, because that's just going to fall off. We need to integrate it into what they're already doing.
Yeah, sounds like the only approach.
Yeah, right, but not all, not always.
You're going, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so doesn't happen.
Yeah, there's so much stuff in working in academic spaces where we're sitting here going, yeah.
Yes.
And yet these things have not been happening. Liv, what about you? What's worked for you?
So my intended audience, I feel like for my PhD research, my intended audience, because I also do some health system research, so the audience is different, but for the PhD, it was around, my intention was to work out primary prevention of depression and anxiety disorders. So my intended audience is actually just the general population, just ordinary everyday people. So I've been really lucky in being able to do some media, do some, some stuff with The Conversation, with ABC, and that got picked up by a number of other people, including Bill Nye, which was like the biggest thrill. Yeah. I will name drop Bill Nye. Oh my goodness. So I actually had some opportunity so far to kind of do some work translating, I guess, the sort of complex papers, which obviously, working to get that data published, so it's got the robustness behind it, but translating the findings into, easy, simple strategies that you can actually take and use in your own life. So I think, longer term, it's probably still going to be one of my main strategies to try and actually get the impact. And like you, Lana, I'm a big believer in open access publishing, because if it's not open access, the vast majority of people that I'm attempting to reach are never going to have access to, to an article hidden behind a paywall. So yeah, it's interesting process, interesting challenge.
So I'll start with you on this one, Liv, because all of you are either very resilient already, or kind of have to be very resilient to keep going. So What do you think in terms of academic resilience, in terms of that keeping going through some of the issues that we've talked about today? What would be the one thing that you think has been the thing that has meant you've been resilient enough to complete a PhD and now continue to work in the academy?
I think there are many things, but one of the really big keys, I think, for myself was having an ability to separate myself from my work, so that I could, and the further you get into it and the more your work becomes you, in a sense, almost, it's more difficult to do. I think, further down the journey you've got of, I've been doing this piece of research for 4 years, it is, who I am now. But I think having the ability to kind of go, okay, this person is criticizing my work, not criticizing me, and being able to kind of give myself permission to take steps back from that. When you've got reviewer feedback and somebody says, I hate the entire premise of what you've done, which did happen to me just recently and is an academic reality, that, sending a paper out and 2 reviewers loved it and the 3rd reviewer just...
reviewer 3, what are you talking about?
And look, I was able to kind of, go, okay, I'm going to take a step back from this, and then I'm going to be calm and come back to it and look at what is the value in the comments that they've made, and which are the bits where I'm just going to sort of go, okay, look, I can't do anything about your opinion on that. All I can do is sort of give my opinion and see what the journal says about that. But if I hadn't spent a lot of time working in mental health, all the different things where you learn how to separate yourself from your work, I don't know if I would have coped with the multiple research failures that we've had to get to the point now where we've had some pretty awesome successes.
Yeah, interesting. What about you, Lana?
I think for me, it's also, I think community is inherently important in all aspects of life, and surrounding yourself with people that remind you that your work is not you, and remind you that your experience prior to this matters, and remind you that what you're doing is important, is really, really important in just being able to bounce back when someone says that you should get someone with English as a first language to review your paper and you're a native English speaker. Things like that you just need a group of people that will laugh with you and remind you that you're smart regardless, I think is sometimes really important.
So separating yourself from your work, surrounding yourself with a supportive community. Louise?
I think keeping your eye on the big picture and why you started in the first place, because there's a lot of hurdles, along the way, and there's the academic things that we've talked about, and I agree about the paper reviewers and things like that as well. You've just got to keep your eye on the bigger picture of why you started and that you can make a difference, and all of those other people that are on that journey with you, the communities that you're working with, maybe the people who are experiencing a certain disease that you are looking at. For me, a lot of my work in cancer control, and I've had the privilege of working with people in a supportive care space as well, and nothing drives you more than needing to work towards a cancer-free future, which is what we like to say. But I think that not recognizing that there are people around you that are supporting you, but also are benefiting together from what you're doing towards that bigger picture. That's very hard to do sometimes, but really important to do.
I love it. I love those tips. And if anyone's watching and considering a career change into academia, I think that's invaluable advice. Okay. The world's in flux at the moment. Lots of stuff happening, to put it mildly. What's the one idea that you've got for change that you think will make things better? Who am I going to start with? I want to start with Louise. What's your one big idea for change?
I don't know whether it's a new idea, but we've got to strengthen communities together, because, togetherness is so important, whether it's, continuing to get through where we are now, continuing to rebuild our economy, which is such an important, determinant of health. But I think that strengthening communities and that collaboration and engagement of people working together and feeling like they have that belonging in a community. It's really important for us to continue to focus on and continue to strive towards.
Lana?
I guess mine's a bit abstract, but I think with social media and 24-hour news cycles and things like that, we've lost, well, my sense is we're starting to lose the desire to dive deeper into issues and fully understand them before making decisions. And I think, if people understood the full complexity of how things like non-communicable diseases are rising, or why we've got problems in the equity of our health system, then perhaps we'd make different decisions. And so I think there is something about slowing down and rebuilding a thirst for really understanding issues before jumping in and responding, whether that's, in the next tweet in responding to someone or in the policy decisions we make as countries. I think there's a lot about let's fully understand the issue and address those root causes rather than just dealing with the kind of symptomatic stuff that we often deal with.
Love it. Thanks, Lana. And Liv, final word to you.
I don't know if this is actually answering your question, but this is what I'm going to say anyway. Because I'm getting good at media now. But what I would really like to see is less pathologizing of normal human reactions, normal human beings, and a move towards seeing humans as remarkably resilient and adaptive, especially in things like, the coronavirus pandemic. We have adapted, we have found ways to get through this. We have continued to maintain connections with communities. We have, we have maintained our sense of belonging. And there's a lot of talk of a massive mental health wave, and I think it's probably likely that we will have one, but I believe we don't have to actually have a massive mental health wave, because we're not putting enough focus on actually supporting people and teaching people and showing people how to prevent that from happening. And it's all the things that we've been talking about today. It's maintaining connections with your community. It's maintaining a focus on strengths, on what you can do in these difficult times, and taking away the idea that if you're anxious during a pandemic, for example, that's a problem. It's actually a completely normal human thing to be anxious during a pandemic. And I would love to focus more on celebrating how adaptive we are as humans, rather than putting a label on, a normal human reaction.
I love that as a final idea, Liv, and thank you. You've summarised the whole show for me, so I don't have to do that now. Obviously, your media training is working.
My work here is done.
I do want to leave everyone with a final point. In reflecting on these shows, I look forward to them every week because they give me some sense of hope that there are good people out there in the world trying to solve the big problems and doing a hell of a good job at it. So thank you for contributing to that, all three of you. And I hope that as much as this brings me a sense of hope, that everyone watching a sense of hope as well, that we can be resilient and we can keep going as long as we've got these awesome people doing the work that they do. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Naomi.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.